I'm the last living cartoon, and oh God, what have I done? Here's a sentence I never thought I'd have to say. This is a video about a post I made on Twitter.com. It concerns the character of Toph Beifong from Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I will now read the tweet in full so that everyone is up to speed. Quote, "If a show was released today where a disabled girl dominated 90% of the fight she was in, was never a love interest to anyone, and actually taught the male protagonist 25% of his combat skill set, they'd call it woke propaganda. Anyway, her name is Toph." Unquote. And already you're probably having some kind of strong emotional reaction to those words, either positively or negatively, and yeah, you're not alone. But here's the neat thing. Even though I started this discourse by absent-mindedly tweeting something I was thinking about during a long walk on the beach with my phone at freaking 12%, the core truth at the heart of this gigantic controversy is not a single soul in that thread disagrees with me that Toph is an amazing character, who is likable, well-written, and the most powerful Earthbender who ever lived, though that last part was oddly contentious. She's a character who has truly stood the test of time, much like the element she's mastered, and through her confidence, strength, and rebellious spirit, she overcame both the crushing expectations of formal society and the known limits of her martial art, and she did it all without ever backing down from who she wanted to be. And you know what? I think that kind of got lost in the shuffle of tweets and retweets. Don't get me wrong, I 100% stand behind my take. I believe it's true, and that's why I said it. But why even bother trying to change people's minds on this, right? That's not my job, and more importantly, I don't think anyone wants their minds changed. I'd rather spend this video in a positive space, discussing the merits of Toph's character and how her disability, gender, and most important of all, her overwhelming strength in fantasy combat intersect to create a unique and iconic character. From here on in, this is 100% a Toph Beifong appreciation post. I don't want to see any fighting in the comments, unless it's hilarious, and I certainly don't want to see any slander of the blind bandit herself. That's a rock fact. And here are some other facts about Toph Beifong. Toph's importance to the Avatar's journey and talent for earthbending were established episodes before she even made her first genuine appearance in Book 2. In Return to Omashu, Aang is told by King Bumi that the person who will train him in earthbending will be someone who has mastered Neutral Jing, a fighting technique which involves waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Neutral Jing is stated to be fundamental to mastering earthbending, and it also describes the way that Toph's seismic sense works to a T. By listening to the minute vibrations in the earth beneath her feet, Toph is able to pinpoint the location of anything in contact with the ground. While any skilled earthbender can use seismic sense, Toph depends on it to perceive the world around her. Her reliance on seismic sense from an early age is what allowed the young earthbender to hone the technique to a level that far exceeded any known bender in the series. Toph's enhanced seismic sense was even what allowed her to grasp the concept behind metal bending, a feat which no one before her even thought possible. It was revealed late into the final season that as a toddler, Toph wandered into a cave and encountered a badger mole, and this was where she instinctively picked up her seismic sense and began to earthbend as easily as others could walk. Thank goodness that scene was in there, because otherwise Toph being good at the one thing that defines her character would seem like the writers wanted to push an agenda. I'm really glad that they clarified that wasn't the case. Less than 10 episodes from the finale. The swamp was the first time Toph was seen by the audience, and while it was only a vision created by the spiritual properties of the Banyan Grove tree, the fact that the universe decided to reveal this girl to Aang is proof that she was destined to teach the Avatar. Through this early appearance, and the conversation about Neutral Jing that preceded it, Toph is given dramatic weight in the narrative before the gang actually meets her. And this is so important because her addition to the main cast a few episodes later needs to be something that the audience can accept. The show has spent over a season establishing the core dynamic between Aang, Katara, and Sokka, and throwing a new character into the mix risks upsetting that balance. One wrong move and you've got a Smormu on your hands, and we really, really don't want that. Watch Smiling Friends, by the way, it's great. I know that in retrospect, trying to imagine Avatar: The Last Airbender without Toph is as difficult as imagining Neon Genesis Evangelion without Asuka, but think about it from the perspective of the writers. Toph is going to be Aang's earthbending teacher, and because of that, her inclusion in the series will be a permanent and irreversible change to the status quo. Setting up these hints in advance builds a sense of mystery around the character, while also easing the audience into the idea that Toph joining the gang is something desirable. And all of this foreshadowing happens before Toph gets a single line of dialogue. It's a brilliant example of showing us and telling us what we need to know about her before she is properly introduced. Of course, this would fall flat if the character wasn't endearing on her own merits. Toph would still need to make a good first impression and wow the audience with her outstanding qualities. So, in her introductory scene in The Blind Bandit, Toph belittles and humiliates a grown man, while at the same time utterly trouncing him in the earthbending ring. In the climax of that same episode, she takes on 7 professional earthbending wrestlers without being hit once, and this causes a highly proficient earthbending instructor to remark that she's the greatest earthbender he's ever seen. In between Toph showing off her raw power, we have a chance to see her open up about the difficulties she's had in her life, namely the fact that because of her blindness, her parents see her as helpless and fragile. She's been kept a secret from the outside world for her own protection, and this led to her hiding her fighting ability because she knows her parents would only restrict her choices further if they found out. Sure enough, this is exactly how they react when Toph's participation in the Earth Rumble tournaments is revealed. Toph is denied agency by her parents, not because she's actually incapable, but because of ableist and gendered assumptions about how she should behave. It's not unlike how Katara was initially barred from taking advanced waterbending classes because of the sexist traditions of the Northern Water Tribe. Both girls can hold their own against seasoned veterans of their respective bending arts, and Toph especially has shown herself to be such a prodigy that she never loses a real fight in the entire show. Sure, Aang is able to knock her out of the arena once, but he's one of the youngest airbending masters in history, second only to his own granddaughter. On top of that, Aang has the advantage that Toph had no idea she was fighting the Last Airbender, and her seismic sense is hard countered by his ability to stay airborne. She does get him back by the end of the episode though, and then, in a hilarious bit of comedy, proceeds to get clonked on the head by her own champion belt as she couldn't perceive Sokka throwing it down to her. This wouldn't be the only time that Toph's disability is played for comedy throughout the series, as Avatar: The Last Airbender is still at its heart a Nickelodeon cartoon. But what's great about these jokes is that none of them are done in a mean-spirited way. More often than not, Toph is the one who brings up her blindness, because the rest of the gang often seems to forget that she doesn't see the same way they do. Instead of assuming we should just laugh at Toph for a condition she was born with, the show is letting us laugh with her as she willingly makes light of her own situation. The difference between these two approaches to comedy is night and day. Not that she could tell. I'm sorry, that's not cool. But you know what is cool? The fact that Toph's unorthodox style of earthbending is actually based on a real-life martial art which can be utilized by people with low vision. Her signature stance comes from the Chugar branch of Southern Praying Mantis Kung Fu, which in close quarters can be used to anticipate an opponent's movements and strike back with merciless short-range attacks. The footwork of Chugar also emphasizes subtle, low-to-the-ground sweeps rather than full kicks, very fitting for a character who needs both feet in contact with the ground to see. In the behind-the-scenes documentary Avatar Spirits, Chugar is demonstrated by Manuel Rodriguez, one of the rare masters of the style in the modern day. Sifu Manny, as he is also known, served as a reference for the animators to better capture Toph's movements in battle. Not only would Southern Praying Mantis help distinguish Toph's martial arts from the Hungar Kung Fu used as the basis for standard earthbending, according to Rodriguez, the original creator of Chugar was in fact a blind woman herself. While Toph is as much of a powerhouse as she is because of the in-universe magic system, it's interesting to note that someone with her same disability could fight just like her in real life, minus the throwing giant boulders around. Given all of the rich detail that went into Toph's character design, it's astounding that we could have missed out on all of it. The original concept for the earthbending member of the gang was a buff meathead jock who would have had a rivalry with Sokka. Nickelodeon Studios was adamant on forcing more male representation into the show, but luckily, series creators Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko fought to change the character to a young blind girl. This was both for the sake of inclusivity with a wider audience, and because they thought it would be funny to see muscular adult earthbenders get tossed around by a little girl. Toph being female added texture to her character and made the cast feel more balanced. It allowed space for Aang, Sokka, and eventually Zuko to have dynamic and interesting male friendships. relationships. A stereotypical manly man character would only have crowded the other guys, and it would have actually hurt the show's depiction of men by making masculinity the subject of exaggerated parody. Changing her gender also gave us Toph's complex and fascinating relationship with Katara, which is explored in several episodes throughout the series. One of the best things about having multiple women in your story is that none of them have to serve as the absolute baseline for the feminine experience. Whether it's the escaped wives of Immortan Joe from Mad Max Fury Road, the Crystal Gems from Steven Universe, the Coven of Styria from Castlevania, the Clique from Euphoria, the main stand users in Stone Ocean, Horace Wamawink and Glendale from Centaur World, Korra, Asami, and Toph's own daughters in The Legend of Korra, you name it. So I was listening back to this section of the video and I realized I had forgotten to include Vi and Jinx from Arcane, which a lot of people who took exception to my tweet seemed to think was some kind of 1 in a million anomaly when it came to good female representation in the modern day, but really, it's just one more example to prove my point. There's less pressure on any one character to be the be-all and end-all for female representation, and because of this, the experience of being a woman becomes just one more character trait among several. This is the case with Toph, who despite teasing Katara for being prim and motherly, also wants to feel girly sometimes, and is insecure about the way her blindness makes managing her appearance more difficult. So yes, Toph's gender does matter to her character, and to imply otherwise is making light of the struggle that the creators went through to make her the way she is. I'm not gonna harp on this point too much, but we OG Avatar fans had the luxury of not seeing Toph's disability and gender as inherently political because the battle for her identity was being fought and won while we were still children. Also, Gamergate hadn't happened yet. Moving on, I'd like to highlight the episode Bitter Work as an essential case study for understanding Toph's greater purpose within the narrative. While Toph's own struggles are certainly compelling, it is within her role as Aang's teacher that her character truly shines. And to really see why that is, we'll have to explore one of her more unusual relationships, her dynamic with Uncle Iroh. On the surface, Toph and Iroh seem like total opposites. Toph is abrasive, egotistical, and selfish on the outside, and these intentional character flaws stem from her insecurities about being seen as weak. Iroh, on the other hand, can be seen as outwardly foolish, passive, and prone to concealing his emotions. And his intentional character flaws are the result of his guilt over his violent past. Both of their elements are also an inversion of their apparent personalities, with Toph's earthbending relying on patience and listening to others, while Iroh's firebending is powerful and straightforward. When you compare Toph and Iroh side by side, the best qualities of each character are reflected in the bending style of the other. Iroh is stoic and selfless, and his sympathy for Zuko allows him to be the father figure that his nephew needs, whereas Toph is honest and resilient, because she needs to be in order to stand up for herself and get what she wants. Her blunt and direct approach to most things also makes her a perfect foil for Aang. Bitter Work is an episode that contrasts Toph and Iroh as mentors to their respective students, and shows that improvement and spiritual growth comes from a necessary embrace of opposing perspectives. In order to learn earthbending, Aang needs to assert himself and face his problems head-on. His airbending training has taught him to detach from the material world, but it's the material world that requires his attention. If he can't stand firm in the face of aggression and meet it with equal force, he'll never grasp the basics of earthbending. Zuko needs to do the opposite. He's too focused on his own ego and pride, and this makes it difficult for him to accept that he needs to change. The technique that Iroh teaches him in this episode, lightning redirection, requires humility and mindfulness. It's a firebending move based on the principles of waterbending, and to learn it, Zuko must adapt to the world outside of himself. Both characters are literally out of their element, being forced to confront the polar opposite of their philosophies. Fortunately, the mentor characters have the right method to bring out the best in their respective students. Iroh knows that Zuko's upbringing in the Fire Nation has left him in the dark when it comes to worldly wisdom, and he's able to get through to his nephew by expanding on the favorable aspects of other cultures. For Toph, this means relentlessly pushing Aang's buttons, calling him names, pushing him around, berating him for his lack of conviction, stealing his food and even abusing his most prized possession, his air nomad glider, right in front of his eyes. Wait, that can't be in the show. Those are all things that woke Mary Sue's are supposed to do to male characters. And we all know that Toph isn't like that. She's well written, and that's the same thing as being nice to man. She would never be rewarded for tearing down a male character, and the show certainly wouldn't frame it as her being completely in the right. Oh, actually, I checked again, and yeah, that totally happens. Wow, that's embarrassing. For me. Truthfully, Toph's harsh training methods are not that uncommon in fiction, especially martial arts or fantasy fiction. In shonen anime, which Avatar: The Last Airbender drew heavy inspiration from, there are countless examples of sadistic mentors who put the protagonist through hell in order to make them that much stronger. Some of the more prominent examples happen to be women as well. Genkai from Yu Yu Hakusho and Anna Kyoyama from Shaman King were both from series that saw moderate popularity in the US during the years leading up to Avatar's premiere. The late 80s gave us Lisa from JoJo Part 2 Battle Tendency, and while the manga wasn't brought over to the States or adapted into an anime for several decades, it's possible that with how influential JoJo has been on the genre, the aforementioned cruel female mentors owe some inspiration to Lisa. This rough archetype may actually have its origins in ancient Irish mythology, as the Scottish warrior maid Skaha served as the martial arts master for the legendary warrior Cú Chulainn, teaching him various ways of fighting and ultimately granting him his strongest weapon, the Gai Bolga. While it doesn't have that much to do with the episode, it's neat to know that Toph comes from a lineage of similar characters. And, like these other women, her training from hell does benefit the hero in the end. Toph's treatment of Aang in this episode is for a clear purpose. She's providing positive punishment to break the Airbender down so she can build him back up as an Earthbender. And yes, we have since learned what positive punishment is, so you can stop correcting us in the comments of the Angel Dust video. Or better yet, go watch it again and leave a new comment about the power of learning. While the average incel would probably fly off the handle and give up on earthbending altogether after suffering 2 seconds of Toph's intense regiment, when Aang finally stands up to his instructor, he is simply firm and in command of his personal effects. He doesn't disrespect Toph or try to make her feel small, he stands his ground and communicates with her honestly. This is something that he couldn't have done unless he made himself more like Toph, the ideal earthbender. Contrast this with Aang's relationship to Katara, who despite eventually being among the best waterbenders in the world, was shown to be less naturally gifted at her element than Aang was. The student-teacher rapport between the two was always closer to a mutual partnership, with both of them learning from each other. Katara was able to coddle Aang during waterbending training because he already had a practical grasp on the concepts of adaptation and change. The most important thing that she could provide for him is the kindness and warmth he was missing inside the iceberg, and before that, in the secluded patriarchal world of the Southern Air Temple. As the person who found him, Katara's main role was to help Aang adjust to the new world he found himself in and grow beyond his adolescent immaturity. While she and Sokka quickly became like family to Aang and showered him with affection, somebody needed to bring the young Avatar down to earth and remind him of his material responsibilities. And although Aang receives advice from a variety of sagely elders over the course of the series, it was only through Toph's strong will and effortless confidence that Aang was able to achieve synthesis with his opposite element.
It is important to draw wisdom from many different places. If we take it from only one place, it becomes rigid and stale.
Bitter Work remains one of the most pivotal episodes of the entire series, but it wouldn't have worked nearly as well without the duality between Toph and Iroh as mentor figures. I fully believe that the writers intended for us to contrast these two characters, as the groundwork for their parallel relationship is shown to us in the previous episode, The Chase. After a heated argument with Aang and Katara, Toph storms off into the woods where she meets Iroh, who had been traveling on his own in search of Zuko. The two share a cup of tea, and each one walks away from the conversation with an important insight. Toph learns that people aren't always looking down on her when they show generosity, and Iroh is reminded that being there for Zuko benefits him as much as it does his nephew. What this exchange tells us is that Iroh often forgets to consider himself in the name of helping others, while Toph has trouble reading the intentions of others because she puts herself first. There's nothing inherently wrong with being self-interested, as long as it serves to reinforce important connections and personal goals, and Toph understands this intuitively in a way that makes her wise beyond her years. She's exactly like her element of Earth, substantial and enduring, rooted in the here and now. Iroh, despite being a firebender, is actually presented in both the chase and bitter work as representative of the element of water. He advises both Toph and Zuko in the delicate art of going with the flow, putting the self aside to accept external factors. He advises Toph to let the people who love her help her, while also telling Zuko not to let the lightning of his enemies into his heart. When you add in Aang and Zuko to even things out, the four principal characters in Bitter Work serve as a microcosm of the interactions between the four elements. The end result is an elegant expression of Avatar: The Last Airbender's core theme of balance. And in regards to the topic of this video, this was the episode that crystallized Toph's role as a character. It gave Aang a believable set of obstacles to overcome in order to start earthbending, and it positioned Toph as the stern, tough love mentor that Aang needed to live up to that part of the Avatar legacy. But as good as this episode is, it pales in comparison to Toph's greatest moment of triumph. The moment she invents metal bending. But before we can talk about that, I just need to say, if you love to hear me go in depth on pieces of media, you should definitely consider joining the Dire Gentleman channel Patreon. We have so many personal and professional projects that take up our time that sometimes it's hard to keep up with the YouTube algorithm. So if you want to see consistent discussion and review content from me and the other members of the channel, it is only one tier, $1 a month, and you'll get multiple podcasts, and there's already a huge backlog of content on there. So go ahead and sign up, and if you regret it, you can always leave. Anyway, back to the video. In the penultimate episode of Book 2, The Guru, Toph is in a bit of a bind. She was deceived by what she thought was a letter from her parents, and was instead ambushed by the men they hired to bring her home. Trapped within a metal cage, Toph is incapable of using her earthbending to free herself. That is, until her seismic sense begins to register pieces of unrefined earth left over from the purification process. With her freedom on the line, Toph desperately hammers away at the metal until finally, it budges. What really makes me hype about this scene isn't just Toph performing a feat of bending skill long thought impossible, it's the voiceover from Guru Patik underscoring the significance of Toph's discovery. While Toph is trying to break out of her confinement, Aang has been busy learning to open his 7 chakras so that he can control the Avatar state. He's made it all the way to the 6th one by the time this scene occurs. Guru Patik explains the 6th chakra as the chakra of insight, which is blocked by illusion. He goes on to say that the greatest illusion in the world is the illusion of separation. Rather than living as one, the world divides itself into 4 nations. This illusion convinces people that the differences between them are the reason that they should remain separate. But the true insight is that being connected to one another is not only good for us, it's a fundamental fact of the universe that we are. This cosmic truth of our connected nature even applies to the 4 elements. Even though it's not Earth in the conventional sense, metal is a part of the world and therefore part of the elements. Toph could have accepted the illusion that she was never going to escape from that metal cage, but it was her stubbornness and pride that drove her towards an insight understood only by the wisest people in the world. She smashes her way out of the cage, and with a combination of earthbending and her newfound metal bending, easily turns the tables on her captors. Then she says something that all of us in our hearts know to be true.
I am the greatest earthbender in the world. Don't you two dunderheads ever forget it.
This was a powerful declaration of achievement from a character we had gotten to know and love throughout the entire season. And when I saw some of the replies to my tweet, the ones attempting to downplay Toph's strength, to downplay the fact that she's still the uncontested pinnacle of what an earthbender can aspire to, and weirdest of all, question her own authority on the matter, I was genuinely surprised. I actually think that those are my least favorite responses to this whole thing, if I'm being honest. Because you can pretend that Toph never insulted or humiliated male characters, even though she did so constantly and we all cheered her for it. You can pretend that her being a girl and having a disability never impacted her character or was never made the focus of her storylines, and I'd just ask you to rewatch her episodes. But claiming that the greatest earthbender in the world isn't the greatest earthbender in the world, something about that doesn't feel right. And on the face of it, what sense does it make? Why would anyone even buy that? I mean, we know why. and I'd rather not dwell on it. I just want to say to anyone who thinks that what I believe is too different for us to get along, you might be right. But I won't try to change your mind. And if that's me perpetuating the illusion of separation, so be it. All I ask is that you try to follow Iroh's advice in Bitter Work and draw wisdom from many different places. Not just your own group, or nation, or organized network of alarmingly similar content creators, and instead seek out the diverse experiences that will make you a more complete human being. Avatar: The Last Airbender taught me that, and it's never too late to relearn what illusions have made you forget. Besides, I think that all of us can still agree that our appreciation for great characters was forever deepened when on May 5th, 2006, the blind Bandit held her champion belt aloft, and what would go on to become one of the most beloved animated shows of all time was changed for the better. I'm the last living cartoon, and don't you dunderheads ever forget it.